Welcome to In the Stigma podcast, where we are challenging the way we think and ending stigmas, starting with ourselves. Here is your host, Jennifer Maneely.
Hey guys, welcome back to In the Stigma podcast. I'm super excited about this episode because I actually have my first guest, and you'll never guess who it is. I'm just going to tell you because I'm too excited. I can't wait. It is actually my mother, Lynn Carnes. She said she would be on my podcast when I asked her, and I have her, and I am so stoked. So welcome to In the Stigma.
Hi. Glad to be here.
So one of the big things that I have really been focusing on, especially when it comes to how do we really look at stigma, how do we end it? And my big thing is we start really speaking our truth. That when it comes to looking at situations that we're in, that it just is, it doesn't have to be full of shame or guilt. It's just something that's happening. It's not anything to be ashamed of or feel guilty over, have some weird judgments or anything like that. So, when I was going through my own addiction, my mom was obviously a big part of that. So this is the reason why I really wanted to have her on my show, is to talk about what were some of her feelings around some stuff and how did she get through it, and if she, maybe even if she had to do it all over again, or we'll just see how the conversation kind of progresses in that way. So I'm going to actually hand it over a little bit. So let's just start from let's just go from where did you first notice that I started having an issue? I know. Well, let's reframe that. My drug addiction issue. I had issues from a young age, but my drug addiction.
Well, the first thing that I have to say about that is you probably were giving me signals long before I saw them.
Yeah.
And it was kind of part of my upbringing to do a good job of pretending that everything was okay and being, I think of it as blind and numb to the signals. Somehow like I was inoculated against something bad happening here. So I would see a signal and think, well, that doesn't happen. It can't mean that for us.
Right.
If I saw that signal with somebody else, I'd say they have a problem. But
right.
I felt
not our family.
Not our family. So honestly, I have to tell you that the night you called, right before your 22nd birthday, was probably really
when I was basically like, "Hey, Mom, I know you probably weren't expecting this, but I kind of need to go to rehab." Well, I'm kind of being forced to go into rehab.
Yeah.
So
that particular sequence and 48 hours was definitely like the biggest wake-up call for me. And it was on so many layers. Selfishly, and this was the pattern that I had exhibited with you pretty much your whole life, was I was happy to show up for you as long as it didn't inconvenience me too much.
Right. Well, but isn't that the way that it, maybe, I don't know, maybe other families experience that very differently, but yeah, of course it's like I'm happy to show up unless I have stuff going on. Now, you had a lot of stuff going on. That's the thing. Like I was, like you had just said, it was right before my 22nd birthday. I was out of the house.
You were out of the house, and actually that particular evening, and I will never forget it because we don't get many snowstorms here. I mean, we live in the mountains of western North Carolina, but it was starting to snow, and there's this thing I love about knowing there's a snowstorm. We had some friends that were just down the street that were supposed to come over for dinner, and, they could get home even if it snowed, and it was going to be a big snowstorm.
Yeah.
And the snow was just starting to fall when you called, and I was so happy to be just settling in and having dinner with friends and not have to go anywhere for a very long time.
Yeah.
And you lived 4.5 hours away. And after that phone call where you told me you had to go to rehab and that you were getting kicked out by your roommate and so forth, man, Russ and I kicked into gear. And Russ was amazing because he was like, I was like, what do we do? And he goes, we're going to get in the car and we're going to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, but it's snowing. And he goes, I know how to drive in the snow. And that was the longest damn drive.
I can only imagine, especially since you had not really a whole lot. You're just like, oh my God.
Well, and on the rehab and snow and driving in the snow.
Yeah.
And so it took us a very long time to get there. It wasn't a 4.5 hour drive, because it snowed. It was one of those snowstorms. It wasn't like we got out of it in the mountains. The entire state of North Carolina was getting dumped on. So we drove, and one of the layers of learning, I will never forget this either, is I was on the phone the entire time calling everybody I knew what to do, because I had never thought about rehab.
Right.
I didn't know the difference between rehab A versus rehab B, what works, what doesn't, how much it costs, what the chances of success are, how to even get you there. None of that was true. But I did have a work colleague who had been through this herself and understood rehab run by addicts. I also had people who had rehab run by clinicians. And so I'd call them people in the medical field, and they'd be wanting to send me off to where I hate to say this, but the science way of doing it was.
Yeah.
And then I had somebody saying go to the street level way of doing it. And, that I had to listen and pay attention to my own guidance as to which way to go.
Right.
So, we made it to the hotel. And are we going to tell that story about the guy? We need to tell the story about the guy.
Yeah. So you finally found a rehab. Now you started calling all your other friends. Now, I think that's interesting because not a lot of people will do that even in their situation, because a lot of times they're like, well, I don't want anybody knowing what's going on in my life.
Yeah.
So kind of at the time, what was, you went into shock a little bit when I called you and you're like, I have no idea what to do. Do you remember, and maybe you don't, and that's okay, but do you remember what was going on in your head? Were you worried about what people were thinking of you, or were you just focused on the solution to the problem?
What was interesting, yes, I was worried. And one of the people I called my sister and her husband, because he is a doctor, and I thought he would have some ideas about where to go and so forth. And I really trusted them not to judge me, but there's still that feeling of I screwed up. And it's almost like I'm having to bare my soul, that I'm such a screw up that I can't even raise a daughter that can stay clean.
Right.
And so there was definitely some of that going on, for sure.
Yeah. And so I imagine that you probably only called specific people. You were, well, we didn't really have Facebook. This is how long ago it goes. I think we're dating ourselves, but we didn't really have Facebook or anything, but you were posting on social media about, what was going on. And now, at the time, before we get into the story of the guy, at the time, so you were, you had a really good, professional job. Were you worried about any of that stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Did you kind of let people in at the time in terms of your work life? Did you let anybody in knowing what was going on with you, or did you just go back to work? When we finally got myself into a situation and you went back home and you just had to go back to living your life, I mean, I'm sure you didn't show up Monday morning telling everybody what was happening, right?
Well, remember, by then I had started my own firm.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I was not at work. I remember I used to work at a bank, but now I was on my own. So it was clients, and it was, it was interesting because this is juxtaposed with right about the time I was starting to figure out, and it took me a while because this was 2007, right? And so I had owned my own firm since 99. Actually, since 2001.
Yeah,
so
and it was like 2000. Well, the snowstorm was probably in 2005.
Okay, that makes sense. So, because I was thinking, gosh, I would have thought I'd learned this by then, but I was still actually learning that nobody but me owned my calendar.
Right.
So when you work in corporate and your calendar's kind of owned by the collective, you feel like you have to tell everybody. You want to keep things secret, but you kind of can't have disappearances. You have to explain your absences.
Right. Yeah.
Right? But during this time, I was not having to explain my absences, but because of so much programming over the years that you do, that I would often tell my clients things that actually were none of their business. Because you can actually hide things and you can overshare too.
Yeah.
And so I had an amazing group of clients at that point. I was working in New York City a fair bit, in Washington, D.C. a lot, but the clients I worked with were really real people. So selectively, I actually did share it, not to everybody.
Right.
Because I didn't think everybody could, as they say, handle the truth.
Right.
But I did have a couple of clients that I felt like could handle it. And the main thing that I had to think about was, can I show up for you while I'm having to show up for my daughter and feel like my life is coming to an end?
Right. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to say, for those that are watching that has ever gone through this, I get asked this question a lot is, do you think that the people that, like me, who are on drugs and doing all this stuff, do you think that they realize what they're doing to their families? And, I'll answer that right now since we're talking about that. The answer is no. I had zero idea how my life and what was going on at the time was impacting you and what you were going through. Like, I'm still learning what you went through during this time period.
And vice versa, by the way.
And I'm asking and I'm asking different questions in this podcast that I haven't asked you before, and I'm getting even more insights as we are sitting here talking, going, holy crap, I had never even considered, you having your set of clients and having to show up. Now that I have my own business, and I think about my clients and what goes on in my life and how my life can very much impact, that world and how I'm able to show up. The answer is no. I had not really known what you were experiencing at that time. So, for that, if anyone ever has that question, the answer is no. They don't know. They don't. They couldn't ever know. They could never know. I'll never know the depths of what you went through during my addiction. Yeah. And so now that was a long segue into this guy, this guy at the hotel. So you finally had someone lead you into this particular rehab, this rehab that I went to. I won't name names, but it was a great rehab, and it was a rehab that was run by addicts for addicts. It was not a clinical approach. And I really actually appreciated that. I still look back on that and I get to know a lot of the rehabs and how they're run and the clinical stuff. And in my mind, it's like, I went to a pretty good rehab, I feel like, that was run for addicts by addicts. And you got your first introduction.
Oh, man, I got it in an instant. So after the first of many sleepless nights, in the Holiday Inn in Wilson, North Carolina, I get up, and I actually was using the hotel phone. I don't even remember what kind of cell phone I had in 2005, but, it was probably some kind of little flip phone or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I was actually on the hotel phone, I think, calling, long distance with a long distance card still and everything. It seems so archaic to say that.
iPhones weren't even invented at this particular time. I know.
We didn't know this
We're
was coming.
dating ourselves.
But I called, and I got a hold of this guy, and I was very much still in my corporate mindset. So I was like, hello, I'm Lynn, and I would like to book a room for my daughter who has told me she's on drugs. And he goes, well, aren't you the good little mommy? And I will just never forget this. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
And then he proceeded to tell me kind of everything, almost everything I needed to know about being the parent of an addict in a way. I said, well, I just, do you have a place for her? And he goes, what makes you think she's coming? And I was like, well, because I told her she needs to go there.
Because you told me to, right?
and he goes, and then I said, I drove through a snowstorm last night to get here. And he goes, how much you want to bet she's already high? And I said, it's only like 8:00 in the morning.
Well, when has that ever stopped us?
Well, exactly. He said something to that effect. And I was standing when I started talking to him, and I start sinking down on the bed. And he just, like in 15 minutes, kind of schooled me. But it was interesting because something about it went in.
Yeah.
And instead of fighting him, I listened. And it was really weird because listening wasn't my strong suit.
No, I will attest to that. You know, he was pretty rough around the edges. I met him later on, obviously, when I actually did go to rehab, and he was a little rough. And I mean, he was very pointed, and my whole life I had watched you cut people down. I mean, not in a bad way, but what I mean is like, you are that pointed person as well. At least you were. Like, you intimidated, you know, a lot of people, including myself. And he was pretty intimidating. So,
Yeah.
I could have totally seen you go the other way, where you're like, not my daughter, not, you know, like you would have gotten a little bit more of like, wait just a damn minute.
Don't we want to say this is just a damn minute?
This is just a damn minute moment.
Yeah.
We have one of the character traits, even with your own mom, is it was
like, who do you think you're
who
talking
do you
to?
think? Wait just a damn minute.
I mean,
you know?
yeah. No, it's actually a miracle that didn't happen. I consider that a gift from God, that something opened up.
And you listened.
And I listened because I think that was the base move that began to allow you to make choices for you. And the only way that was going to happen is if I set the conditions for that.
Yeah.
And I'm really convinced that had I continued to be, I hate to use the word, but it's kind of self-righteous. Like, I'm right, you're wrong. I don't have to hear a word you're saying. Just do it my way. If I had stuck with that, I feel like you would have had to continue to rebel against that.
Well, and I think, you know, even for what I see in those moments, I think in that moment, you knew, as smart as you are, as educated as you are, as your ability to stand up for yourself, for other people, like all of that stuff, that can sometimes, when you go into an area of the unknown, can sometimes be really detrimental. And what you did in that moment was you decided, I have no fucking clue what to do. Maybe I should listen to someone that knows this stuff, because this was not our world. You know, I think a lot of people will grow up kind of in this world and be very familiar, but this wasn't anything that either one of us, I don't think, grew up thinking they would ever experience. You know, like, we came from a good family. We were the church at every Sunday.
No, we were
meeting, you know,
like I call it the Leave It to Beaver family.
We kind of were,
and we didn't. I teach a self-awareness program where I've had hundreds of people come through and learned most people have somewhere in their family either alcohol abuse, sexual abuse, physical or mental abuse. You know, so many people experience that, and we had not had that. We didn't have the drunk person that we, even if it was the drunk Uncle Al or whatever.
Right.
Like, we didn't have any of that.
We didn't have that.
No,
No.
we were very much sort of leave it to Beaver, everything is good. And so that was pretty shocking to me to not know what to do. But I have to tell you, I'm still kind of surprised I listened, because I'm not afraid. There's a game called Balderdash, and I'm really good at it because I can put the bluster on with the best of them.
Yeah.
And so the fact that I actually let that in and listened and had somehow, and of course Russ was incredibly supportive, and I have to do a huge shout out to, and I don't think she'll mind, Melissa McNair, who's one of my colleagues. She's the one who actually helped me find the place to go, and who is just a very, very wise woman. And with her kind of support, I had, even though she wasn't my per se coach, she kind of was,
right.
And it was my, if you don't have a guide to navigate the unknown, you really are like taking one step at a time in the fog. And if you don't have a lot of trust on your inner guidance, which I didn't at the time, then there's a really good chance you're going to step off a cliff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, especially in something like this where it goes so far beyond, like, this has very little to do with the parenting role. You know, this has a lot more of, like,
parenting.
This isn't parent. It
is, but it isn't.
It is.
know?
Like, you still had to parent me, but as a 22-year-old person, your job as a parent is over. Now it's your job kind of to just support and guide and whatever else that kind of means.
Well, you know here's how I've come to think of it, and I'm sure it's because I've got this filter. We all live in a filter bubble, right?
Yeah.
And I teach leadership. I work with leaders, and I really want people to be able to lead in a way that isn't through fear and intimidation. It's not through placation.
Yeah.
It's not through power over or under, but power with. And that means setting up the conditions for people to, like, work together, and you set the conditions for people to make really great choices. And I work with very senior leaders where they have to they put their entire careers in the hands of other people to run divisions, to run thousands and thousands of people that are out of their control. And that is actually exactly what a parent with a child in addiction has to do.
Yeah.
It feels like the stakes are so high because it's your child's life.
Yeah.
But you have to set the conditions for them to make good choices.
Yeah. Yeah. And not be in that constant state of survival mode. Because we talk about that some, where it's like, if you're in survival mode all the time, even though your child's life is kind of at stake here, then your decisions may not be as clear.
It's not clear. And survival mode is designed to literally keep you alive.
Yeah.
But it's tunnel vision. And so it's like you don't see all your choices and you have no repertoire.
Yeah.
And the thing that having somebody like Melissa to work with and have, the support I had of Russ, and for sure a really strong life of prayer.
Oh, yeah.
I'm never going to take that away. But to have that help me guide through is the only thing that made it work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm excited. I want to fast forward because So before, you had no idea that I had a problem, an issue, any sort of addiction. Now you know that this is a thing. And I went to rehab.
Yeah.
I stayed clean for 2 years, about that. And then things kind of started falling all through. In the meantime, I had met a boy. I had married said boy.
Yes. And he was a boy.
I had married said boy. And we were not doing well in terms of our recovery, staying clean, any of that stuff. And so now we go off the rails. And we had lived pretty long into, not long, it was a few months. It was a hard few months for us.
It goes down fast, doesn't it?
We did pretty good at first. And then when things started going downhill, things started going downhill pretty fast. Now, I was starting to do things, even in my own life, that I had never imagined myself doing. And of course, I look back and it's like, even at the time, it's like I wanted to blame, now he's my ex-husband, but I wanted to blame him for everything. And, I look back and I'm like, well, I made a lot of decisions for myself, but it was really easy to do. Now, I guess my question or my thoughts and throwing it back into your corner is, now that you know that I'm susceptible to this and I'm in recovery and I'm an addict, when did you start noticing red flags then?
Slower than I should have. So it was interesting because I was working up in the D.C. area. You lived in the D.C. area. We would go meet each other for dinner a lot.
Yeah.
And then the night before I found out that you guys had gone really off the rails, you canceled a dinner with me. And this was following you having called me hysterical about having had your TV stolen, and it wasn't. You'd sold it, I think, to...
No, it was actually stolen.
Oh, okay.
No, that was actually...
Oh, that was real?
That was a real... No,
I looked back on it.
You probably were like, oh, she totally lied to me.
Well, no, I looked back on at the time. I thought it was real. So anyway,
but that was a real thing.
You called me with that cockamamie story. I didn't know it was cockamamie at the time. You did a good job of lying.
I was so good.
You were a good liar, man.
So good.
But I ran off the road and it didn't want to hit this dog, and it hurt my car, and again, I was really burning the candle on both ends.
Yeah. Professionally and
both professionally and there's always that background worry, and I'm telling you, the worry cost me a lot of sleep, and sleep costs you everything. I mean, I am a huge believer in sleep, and so I was tired, and when you canceled the dinner, I was staying in downtown DC for the first time at a hotel I hadn't been in a while. And I was actually relieved because I was going to go back and have this lovely dinner at the hotel and not have to drive an hour back after dinner. I could just go up to my room and fall asleep. And I actually remember at that dinner that night, by myself I was probably reading a newspaper or a magazine or something, and, feeling everything was fine.
Yeah.
And then the next morning when I couldn't get a hold of you, I did something I never do. I was meeting with a client. We were having a one-on-one where the phones never come out, but I had my little flip phone, and I said, I've got to put this here because my daughter hurt her car, and I'm going to have to help her, and I just need to coordinate with her. And then that meeting ended, and then a series of events unfolded where I was able to find out that you were back on drugs, but it was because I couldn't. I called you, and your phone all of a sudden was disconnected.
Right.
Because we still had landlines mostly then.
Yeah.
And then you didn't answer your cell phone, and you were supposed to be packing and moving because y'all had lost your apartment.
Yeah, we were moving in with his parents.
And then I had to change my flight, and that's a whole story in and of itself we won't go into here, I guess. But, when I started, putting two and two together, it really came in when I walked into your apartment.
Yeah.
And I saw really a pig. I had been, she's moving, and so I had a picture in my life of what life should look like. And it was going to be boxes against the wall, mostly labeled and neat and ready to go for moving.
Which I've never moved that way, by the way.
Yeah, I know, because, this is how we live in our own filter bubble, right? I was in my own bubble of how things should go. And there was a pan of eggs on the counter, a full pan. There was not a single space on the counter or the carpet in the entire house.
Yeah, it was pretty messy.
It was a landfill. It was like walking into a landfill.
Yeah, it was pretty messy.
And it was, I will never forget, because the apartment woman that let me in, and it wasn't a breach of privacy. I was on your lease.
Yeah.
So she had the right to let me in. And I walk in, and I was like, oh my gosh. And she goes, oh, do you think they're on drugs? And I said, I do now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it was like you calling me, but it was like, and it's interesting because something clicks in me.
Yeah.
And I really do. It happens in skiing. It happens everywhere I'm under pressure. I actually do have a red light. The red light comes on, and I know how to show up.
Yeah, you do. It's true.
At that moment, it was like I was a whole, it's like I go from denial to performer in a heartbeat.
You did. And
I
was
in denial, but then I went into
You did. And now I want to talk about this denial. So as soon as the red light goes on, you're out of denial.
Yeah.
Can you look back with 2020 vision before you thought everything was fine? You look back at it, and could you see where you're like, oh, that makes so much more sense now? Mm-hmm. Now that I'm aware of what has been going on for the past few months. Because as soon as you call me and you ask me dead to basically dead to rights.
Oh, I did.
Are you
on drugs?
On drugs. You asked me, and I had known that you were in my apartment, so I was like, I don't think it makes any sense to be lying now.
Well, but you got quiet.
I paused because, and this was my pause. One is I think I was stoned and I was a little fuzzy. And I did pause. And the pause was mostly me evaluating my options because I had gotten so caught into lying. I was like, do I want to try to keep digging, or is this the moment then I'm going to face everything and actually be honest and let it go, and then allow people to help me from here. And so that was my moment of going, which way am I going to try to go? And because the night before, and literally the night before, after calling you and going through the whole thing, and like, because why I didn't show up, to be honest, was because I was so high. I had gotten high all day. I was so high that I knew that I could not show up to that dinner. I had every intention up until the moment that I called you to show up to that dinner. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, fuck, I'm too high. And as we were sitting there and I was not showing up, and I was sitting in the bathroom, and I just had this like kind of peace wash over me that night before, and going, I think I'm in trouble, and I am going to die. Yeah. Like that night before, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was going to end up dying. And where I was at in my life, I looked around and I'm like, my body is giving out on me. Yeah. If I don't overdose, which was very close, if I don't overdose, I think I'm like, my heart's just going to quit. Mm-hmm. And I don't think my heart can handle what I'm doing to it for more than 2 or 3 more weeks at the rate like we were going. So I knew I was going to die, and I was actually kind of okay with it. That's the truth. Is like I was completely okay in that moment dying because I had no other way out. In my mind, I didn't know any other solution. Yeah. And that pause was me evaluating my options and going, I think that if I'm honest at this moment, I can actually maybe get help. And it was that moment where it was like, are you going to keep trying to go down this road, or are you going to start choosing life? Wow. And so in that pause, that it's kind of a brief pause.
It felt like an eternity to me. It answered the question for me.
And then the next words out of my mouth was yes. And then I just kept, like, I just opened the floodgates of all the stuff that we had been lying and bullshitting and what was really going on, and all the stories that had been going on for like I didn't hold anything back at that moment. Because like, there's no sense in it. Yeah. There's no sense in any more trying to stop this. But once I got honest and I was telling you, were there times in which you could look back, hindsight being 20/20, and going, those conversations now make a whole lot more sense, or red flags that happened prior to you actually walking into that apartment? Did that start making sense to you?
Well, yes, but I have to also confess that I think the only signals that I was getting were the big ones, because I just didn't know. So the big signal later I learned was when you said you weren't going to meetings anymore. Mm. Now that should have been, for me, it was like a little like, almost barely a twinge. When it should have been a flashing red, all hands on deck. But you were like,
oh, maybe you don't need those meetings
anymore. And I was like, man, well, okay. Goodness, I don't know that I've ever thought about this before, but let me just be really transparent. Truth be told, I kind of wanted it to mean, oh, she wasn't really ever an addict. Mm. And so now if she's not going to meetings, that doesn't mean, then I'm not going to be the parent of an addict.
Right.
And it was just a little blip, and everything will be fine. Like it's in a way, it's a return to denial and that numbness. And now that I'm really working on attuning myself to signals and really understanding how to read things, and this is of course not just in the world with you,
right? But just
in terms of refining my own skills. I wonder how many signals I got that I missed, because there was so friggin' much noise going on in my head. Yeah. Right? And so much wishing that it didn't have to be what it was.
Well, there was times, and it's like I look back, and this is why I asked, because I'm like, how did you not see this coming? Like,
yeah, no,
because like you had even there was a trip that I had gone to go see in Texas in the middle of all this. I'd lost a whole bunch of weight. I was a hot mess. You remember, like I had hurt my hand.
Yeah.
I had hurt my hand, and I had covered it up.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't even know if we've ever talked about this, but that was a lie. Maybe
I love how we find out live these things. Well, I'm not surprised. It's tit for tat, right?
I guess we never really talked about that in terms of like, like I had bruised my hand. There was a bruise, but it wasn't from hitting my hand on car parts like I had said. But
oh yes, I remember that.
Yeah, like I had slammed my hand in a car parts, which was actually not true, but I did have a bruise on my hand. Yeah, and I don't really want to go into it.
No, let's not go into what that was about. This is enough. Thank you.
I know.
Live TV
Surprise.
But this is the thing.
But it was like, how could you not have seen all of those? But not to like, come down on you, but that's how far we go into like our world.
Well, so here's like, this happened yesterday. I saw a yellow Volkswagen.
Oh yeah.
Right? And it's the
lens.
idea of the filter and so forth, right? Had I opened myself up to say, I need to be looking for signals that my daughter is on drugs, that my daughter's okay, that my daughter's doing better.
Right.
If I had opened that filter up,
right,
we would have had a chance. But I didn't want to know what I didn't want to know. And I didn't even know I needed to know it. So I just didn't know. And I didn't know certain things like signals, like, watch for crazy bruises or look for certain ways the pupils are dilated or, tune into lies, like pay attention to whether the story hangs together or not. Like, you and I had actually gone through, when you were younger, you were pretty good at lying.
I've always been great at it.
And then we went through some things that got you to kind of come back to being more honest with me. And again, I just wanted it to be over. I didn't want to have to worry about that anymore. And that's just nonsense. That's just childlike thinking. That's what I was caught in.
And you said that you were like, well, I just wanted to move on. If I'm not going to meetings, then maybe I'm not really an addict. Because
for sure.
What would that have meant if one is like, okay, so one side is, okay, I'm an addict. And your feelings about that. The other side is what could you have felt if that like actually was true? If maybe I wasn't an addict.
Well, of course, it would have meant that for me, it would actually have meant the end of worry.
Right.
Right. So when you quit going to meetings, I actually took that as a signal to quit worrying.
You're like, yes,
because
she's not.
I
doesn't need that anymore.
She never was. She never had a problem. No, it was. Being raised by a world champion warrior in my mom.
Yeah.
What I liked was things that kept me from having to worry. It's like, just don't add any more worry to my life.
Right.
And so that, believe it or not, I took it the exact opposite of the way I should have, which is, okay, well, I don't have to worry about that anymore. She's not got a problem.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I'm thinking I'm not worrying anymore, I'm not looking anymore.
Yeah. And
that's when life can tend to come back and bite you in the ass.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, because we're just not trained in that. And
yeah,
I'm a reformed. I've actually learned to make worry my friend, because I actually now treat those things that I used to worry about as signals to either do something about or let go.
Yeah.
But I don't do it willy-nilly. I've changed dramatically in that realm because of our experience together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know that you had changed dramatically this last time, like kind of like when you set me down and this was like the day of when you found me,
when you told
and
me
I told, so after that pause,
yes,
I got really honest.
That was a scene.
And then you came and you found me at my in-laws.
I did.
And we had a very difficult conversation. I can't remember that whole day.
I do.
But I mean, I only remember, I can't remember everything you even said, but I do remember. I know. Well, I remember this is what pierced, kind of in my head. This is, I think, when things became very clear for me and in our relationship was when you looked at me and you said, "Jen, I have a pretty good life. I'm going to learn how to live my life without you if I have to." And you did tell me you were going to help me one more time.
I did.
And that was like how I chose to live my life. After that was completely up to me. And I think what got me in that moment was not so much what you were saying, but the feelings behind it, because I knew you actually meant it.
Yeah. Well, the thing I meant, there was a piece of context that came before that. I think that was the hardest thing for me to say, and it's this. It was that I said you probably do have a lot of resentments against me because I was anything but a perfect mother, and you have every right to be pissed at me.
Yeah.
And I'm ready to face anything.
And that did make a big moment for me.
And I have a pretty damn good life. And I think I said, if you are trying to kill yourself to get back at me, look at my life. It's pretty damn good. And I am strong enough to live without you because you're going to be the one that's dead.
And that one struck me, and I knew that you meant it. That's the difference. Is like, I think people say some things in a bluff way, but I knew that you really meant it. And I think it was when you said that you have every right to be pissed at me, I think that took the ownership back and put it on me.
Yeah.
Where it's like I had to learn how to deal with my anger or whatever it was that I was trying to do. I'm not even entirely sure what I was trying to do. Most of it was subconscious, like.
Well, isn't it usually?
Right.
You're not really, like, I wasn't in denial or worrying consciously. It was just,
it was
subconscious.
It was all that very subconscious. But when you said that, it kind of made me really have to take some ownership and take some hard looks at some things. And we have, I mean, we could probably go on all day. We have so many freaking stories, and we'll have to do another one of these because here's one thing though that I do want to talk about, because this is, it's in the stigma, and it's all about really just speaking your truth and really owning, because like if you feel shame, if you feel guilt, if you feel all of that stuff, then oftentimes that's what we can do. We stigmatize these things.
Yeah.
Now, afterwards, obviously, at one point you were like, okay, I don't want to have to worry about you. You're not going to meetings. And, basically you're like, oh, maybe you're not an addict. Well, now after this round, things become very clear. And so just kind of like summarize, we'll time box it. That first year of me being clean again, what was going on with you? Like, what was different about this time than what it was before? Because there was a big difference even with us, our relationship, the way we handled things, all of that stuff.
I'm going to say the biggest change was that, as not 100% of the time, but as often as possible, I was trying to help you see your choices.
Yeah.
Rather than try to make your choices for you.
Right.
And it was the hardest thing I've ever done. So a lot of time during those prayers, it was almost as if I could hear God's voice saying, because I'd want to come get you, because you were still in that situation.
I was still with my ex-husband. He wasn't my ex-husband. He's still my husband at the time.
And I will never forget telling this story to somebody, and he said, I don't believe I could leave my daughter in that circumstance. I would have to go get her. And he didn't. He whether he meant it or not, I felt some shame. I felt like he was telling me I wasn't a good enough mother to not come and get in the car and come and take you out of there. And it was at moments like that that I really had to turn it to the Spirit.
Right.
And say, okay, what do I do? And the answer every single time was, you let me be God.
Yeah.
And I will take care of you, and I will take care of her. And that's in life and death.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't, I didn't know that was what was going on at the time because I'm trying to live my own life. But it was the best thing that I could have done, even for myself, was really face my choices and take responsibility for my life. Like, basically, you kind of took the safety net away.
For the first time in your
For
whole
the
life.
first time in my whole life, my safety net wasn't there. And even when I tried to figure out if it was still there or not, you basically allowed me to know that you were there to help me and support me, and we were going to have a relationship, but you were no longer my safety net. Mm-hmm. And when I learned that you were no longer my safety net and you weren't going to support and enable my poor decisions, so it wasn't even about drugs.
No.
Sometimes it was about like, oh, Mom, I can't pay my car insurance. Well, I couldn't pay my car insurance because I still had poor spending habits.
That's exactly right. You're a lot of those things went over, and letting you like get out of credit card debt.
Yeah.
There was a part of me that wanted just to like write a check and get you clean, get you started, and then let you go. But I have to say something and this was probably something I learned later, but. Or heard later, but I remember when Oprah went to Haiti and Sean Penn was helping people get, after the hurricane, back on their feet. And she goes, I can write a check for everybody, and we can just call it even, and they'll get back on their feet. And he says that's the worst thing you can do.
It is.
Because they won't have built the muscles to be strong with their finances. And I knew enough to say, you'll just get yourself back in there. We've got to help you. Like, you getting yourself out was the way you built the strength to keep yourself from going there again.
And I needed the strength. I needed to know how to manage my money.
That's right.
And if you kept coming in and like bailing me out every time I got into financial problems, now I will say that even after that year, I must say, like, I'm a whole lot better at my finances now.
Oh no, you're crazy good at it.
I mean, not like, it's not like I have all of this money or anything like that, but you can give me just a little bit.
Well,
and I know how now to kind of budget and figure some stuff out. Not that I won't ever sit here and claim perfection on some of that stuff. But I will say that I'm a whole lot better now at my finances than I was. And it's because I learned how to do it. But there was a lot for me that I had to learn how to do. And I had to do it for myself. And you allowed me that because my whole life I never knew how to do it because you were always there.
I was always there, and I was always taking care of you, so I didn't have to feel bad about my mothering.
Yeah.
And so the thing, and I'm kind of even putting a little bit of this together as we're talking right now, is just the gift you give to show somebody their own strength and give them the opportunity to build their own muscles is priceless.
Absolutely.
And my strength is to be able to stand by and let you make mistakes.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't mean I'm a bad mother. In fact, it's the opposite.
Yeah, and I think, like, we talk a lot, and language is an important thing. It's huge when it comes to people wanting, and I look at something like this, and it's like, well, this is kind of why, I started my own business, and I look at people that really struggle when other people tell them you have to let them hit rock bottom. Mm-hmm. Well, that's really, really scary to think about letting people hit their rock bottom, because for many people, they think that that's just going to be death, or they're going to get really close to it. And
a lot of times, actually, it is.
And
which
it
is
is
the hard news.
It is the hard news. However, what I will say is, instead of saying that, we say what we just talked about, which is like, allow people their choices so they can learn how to get out of it. And let them figure it out. Because for me, that's what saved my life, was letting me figure it out.
Well, you and I both talk about that, the Beckhart change equation, which says that for any change, there's always resistance.
Oh, yeah.
But if you have dissatisfaction times vision times first steps be greater than that resistance,
Yes.
you can actually get over the resistance. And you kind of didn't have a good picture of a different life. You didn't have any idea what to do.
I had no idea what to do.
And the lack of the safety net, so those were almost a zero.
Yeah.
Right? And so if those are zero, nothing's going anywhere. But the lack of a safety net caused you to really be dissatisfied.
Oh, yeah.
And so that number got very big. And if you've got a 1 and a 1 and a million, then and the resistance is only 500,000, you're going to get somewhere. And so I feel like helping you be dissatisfied and not giving you, and
That's what caused me to change.
And there's another saying, and I've heard it in the horse world, but I think it actually may have come from outside of the horse world. And it's like, because when we're training, I'm not a big, I'm just learning this, but you want the horse to make his own choice. You want him to be able to face his fears. You want that horse, you don't want to have to worry about that. And you want, the saying is, you want to make the right things easy and the wrong things hard.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, that's what I did for you, is I made the right things easier and the wrong things hard.
Yeah.
And that way, but you were still making the choice. It's like your choice.
Yeah.
But there's hell over there, and there's a way out over here. Now, which way do you want to go?
Yeah. And, to kind of close, so because this is a lot about like stigma is if you could tell anybody that's either experiencing this, or maybe it's not this situation in particular, but like when it comes to stigma, like, or even people just really being able to empower themselves, really, because this is really what this is like you're empowering yourself.
Yes.
What would you say to them? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot. That's a big, big thing, but
there's two pieces to this.
Okay.
Actually, I always think about three things. I think about having something in your pocket,
Yes.
something that can get you back, and then something that is like going to keep you from getting out of balance in the first place, if you will. And the thing to have in your pocket is to assume, I did a TED Talk on this, but to assume positive intent. Now, what does that look like when your child's on drugs, or when you? But it's for yourself. It's like assume that right now you don't need to go into your past, because assuming positive intent is the easy button to finding your curiosity and to listening to what's going on.
Yeah.
If we're not assuming positive intent, we're reaching into our old bag of tricks, and we think we know. And that was my old bag of tricks, was denial and worry. Instead of curious and going, I wonder what it means when somebody gets off of or quits going to meetings. I wonder if I should look into. I wasn't curious at all. So start just by, and if you can, you don't have to assume positive intent to be curious, but I think it gets you there faster because you're not beating yourself up and you're not beating them up.
Right.
So just stop with the beating up.
Right.
Assume that there's something you can learn and do. There's always another move, but it can only happen if you're not looking in your past. You need to look at your next move. That's number one. Number two is do your work. Yes. And what I mean by do your work is all of us were conditioned and programmed, and we have assumptions and beliefs and filters and such that are driving the way we are. And the work that I have done through all the different coaches has been unbelievably helpful for me to realize it's not always the same thing. I don't always have to. And it's so ingrained in your muscle memory that I don't care how much you think you know something, it's not necessarily going to be at your disposal when you're under pressure.
Yeah.
So, and there's no greater pressure than thinking you're going to lose your child. So do your work and learn how to do this under pressure. So that you can be at your best when it feels like you might be at your worst. And then the third thing I would say is, whatever your spiritual tradition is, whatever you believe in terms of a higher power, I believe the message for all of them is that God is welcoming you with open arms and He loves you. And I believe that true faith is trusting that instead of trying to prove it to everybody else, because your soul is between you and God. And so I feel like people need to take a moment. I'm looking at your background with the stars and the universe, and it's like, take a moment to look at the creator of the universe, however your tradition tells you that came to be.
Yeah.
And realize that you are small and yet matter in that size of the universe. And if you will actually rest on that, then you don't have to ask people outside of you to tell you if you're okay. And shame is thinking that you're not okay and that you don't belong.
Yeah.
And you do.
Yeah.
And whatever it takes for you to get to that place, I'd say get there.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like beyond our experience. When the minute that someone feels like shame or guilt about anything, it doesn't have to be about this, but really anything, it's that programming that we're kind of in. And it's like when we can embrace of just what is versus having to put, negative connotations, or we're living in our past, or we're living in our conditioning,
or we're making up stories.
We're making up
stories.
We just make up crap.
We just make up crap so we don't have to not know.
Right. Yeah. And it's like being willing to be curious and that assume positive intent. And it's not assume positive intent that everything is okay.
No.
It's just assuming that you're okay with whatever it is.
And that there's something to learn and that you can handle it. Like, I feel like the uncertainty in this world today is a toxic brew if you haven't trained yourself to deal with uncertainty.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it produces a lot of anxiety.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm a huge believer that we need to learn to manage our anxiety, but I don't think we need any kind of medication to do it. I think we can practice it.
Yes.
And I think one of the places to start is to get yourself in nature.
Yeah.
And so, and I realize that when I say something like, figure out where you fit in the universe.
Yeah.
That's a big one. But there are tools and there are people and there are places. But, practices like breathing.
Absolutely.
Learning how to truly get quiet in your mind and meditating, journaling, reflection. Learning how to do those things and having somebody that can teach you to do those things. I just saw something on CBS this morning. I think it was CBS this morning, talking about people in war-torn areas like Syria. They're bringing meditation and breathing and practices in for these people who are refugees that have lost everything. And they're having people instantly feel better. Instantly be able to manage all the uncertainty of having lost everything.
Yeah.
And the truth is, all of us can get through this if we are willing to let somebody, and I think you do have to have help, but let somebody help you find the strength that's within you. You have it.
Yes.
You have it, but you sometimes need somebody to show you how to unlock it, or as I say, unleash it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it's there.
So speaking of Unleashed, you actually have your own podcast.
I do.
Yeah, and it's called Creative Spirits Unleashed.
Absolutely.
You can go find Lynn at any of the major things, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Yeah. We got you on iTunes.
It's been downloaded lots of times.
Oh yeah,
all over the world.
So you can go. It's you can just type in Creative Spirits Unleashed, or you can go check out Lynn. I'd invite you to actually get to know this woman even more and go visit her website. It's lynncarnes.com. Carnes is spelled Carnes.
That's right.
And she has some amazing content on there. We had a podcast, we used to work together, and it's still up. It's called My Boss, My Mom. So you can hear even more of our stories. Mom. She's the mom, and the boss. And the boss. I guess I'm both. My boss, my mom. Yeah. So she was both my boss and my mom, and we have some good stories around that one. And in her podcast, Creative Spirits Unleashed, she talks a lot about with other executives about this work, about empowering yourself, the confidence that it takes. And, we both have several different people that help us through finding our true selves. And that's why it's called Unleash. It's because we're all just trying to unleash the best versions of us. Yeah. So anyway, that's going to be it really for this podcast. Thank you so much. This will not be the only time that we do this.
Well, it's fun. I actually really enjoy this.
This is
a fascinating experience, although I have to tell you,
it's hot.
I thought I was going to need some Kleenex.
I saw you getting really emotional at one point, and I was like, good or bad? I don't know, but I'm just letting it happen. It doesn't have to be good or bad. It was just happening.
Yeah.
But it does get really emotional, and I think when we go into our story, there was just so many moments because it was just painful, and even we've done a lot of work, and I'm so grateful for you at the end of the day for you doing your work, because you doing your work is what really truly helped me kind of snapped out. And you didn't do it for me, you did it for yourself, and I don't even think you meant to. But it happened, and you focusing in on this stuff really helped me, because you started becoming more confident and empowering yourself to the point where you knew what you had to do the same for me, which is provide that empowerment and that confidence in what I needed to gain for myself. So that was hugely powerful, and I'm forever grateful that you did that for you. And I would invite anyone to do that for themselves. I
think it goes back to the leader. I was trying to do leadership work, right?
Yeah.
That's a whole nother story about how I sucked as a leader,
Right?
and I needed to do the work,
which we're going to go into in the next time we sit down.
But that probably helped, that probably the parenting and the leadership were the same thing.
Same
because
thing.
Leadership is leadership.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the cool part of this work is that a lot of times you and I both work with people who are both leaders and parents. And there's a tremendous crossover.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So anyway, as usual, I challenge you guys to go tell at least 5 people about this podcast and share it with them, because you never know who you're going to help or who needs to hear this. So if you want some more, I'm going to put up some links. I'm going to do some good show notes. We're going to have some exciting new things coming out for this particular podcast, because this was a very special one and near and dear to my heart. And thank you again. Go to jennifermaneely.com. My last name, as you probably would never know how to spell that on your own, is Maneely, jennifermaneely.com. And you can go find some really cool stuff up there, especially about this podcast. But anyway, I hope you guys have a great week. Let me know how you feel. Obviously, you can also go find me on all of the other socials as well. And really looking forward to knowing what your comments are. If you have anything, if you want to leave me a voicemail, or if you just want to write me a message, I would love to hear from you. Let me know what you think. And just thank Lynn again for coming out here. So, it's still so weird to call you Lynn, but thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom.
But anyway, hope you have a great week, guys.